It was quite a long time ago. I was a sophomore at the time. Actually, it's not even my story, but there's no one else to tell it to. There was this girl in college with me. Excellent, pathologically honest, the pride of her parents. She was my cousin or third cousin. A distant relative from out of town. She rented a small apartment in our town and lived modestly. But one weekend something strange happened. At first I didn't think much of it. Then I realized I shouldn't have. She came running to me at 9 in the morning with snot all over her face, sobbing and unable to calm down. It was an hour and a half before she told me what had happened. Turns out she had a secret hobby. Reading scary stories, watching horror movies and the like. So she decided to experiment. In the evening she put a camera in front of her bed and went to bed, hoping to see something unusual. Then she told me something strange. I thought at the time that, having escaped from her parents' control, she was addicted to drugs, but then, as I said, I regretted not believing her. She downloaded the video to her laptop and started watching it. At first, she was just tossing and turning in her sleep. Then, she said, she only took her eyes off the monitor for a second to brush off a fly. When she looked at the monitor again, she said she felt cold for a second. In the videotape, she raised her head and stared at the camera with a surprised expression on her face. Judging from the videotape, she describes herself as follows. Wide open eyes, raised eyebrows but a perfectly smooth forehead and an easy smile. That's the way a cat looks when it sees something tasty in its owner's hands. That was how she described herself. The strangest thing about this face was that the pupils were wide. So wide that you could barely see the iris. For several minutes she, the one in the videotape, stared at the camera without blinking or moving. My sister thought something had broken and the frame froze, but then something caught her attention that just couldn't be. She had short dark hair at the time, and one strand on the top of her head was dyed bright orange. But she had seen that strand somewhere around the neck of the girl she saw in the videotape, and that couldn't be because the strand was too short. So it gave the impression that her head was lying on a pillow, with something else sitting on top of it and looking into the camera. As soon as she thought about that strand of hair, something happened that sent her into hysterics. She stuttered and shook for a few minutes before continuing, and asked me if I would call her crazy if she told me about it, and if I would tell anyone else not to call her that. She swears she's telling the truth. Her own face, which had been staring fixedly into the camera with huge pupils for 10 minutes, suddenly stretched, and after a couple of seconds her mouth opened unnaturally wide. It could probably fit a fist vertically, she said. Both jaw and face jerked to the side, forming a sort of C. She immediately turned off the video. Then I told her to pull herself together, and I would personally come to her house and check her laptop. She immediately agreed and we went to her house. It turned out that the recording had been deleted. She swore she hadn't done it, and I was even more convinced that she was dabbling in drugs. After that, nothing much happened for a year. After this incident, she gave up experimenting with the supernatural. It seemed like the story was over. But one day she called me and said in a broken voice that it was back. I didn't immediately understand what she meant, but she reminded me of her story. A few days ago she was at the birthday party of her boyfriend, whom she met after the story. She was shown pictures from the party. She said that this face reappeared in all the pictures. Surprised, with a faint smile and huge black pupils. This despite the flash and the fact that everyone's pupils were red except her. I didn't bother to help her. I thought she was nervous after the first incident, and I told her that the pictures were no danger to her. At that point, I was just flirting with the girl, and I didn't have time to hear about what happened to her again. I just didn't believe her last time. If you don't like the pictures, delete them and that's it. I said and said goodbye. A few days later, my relative was found dead in her own bed. According to everyone who saw her, her eyes were almost round with horror, and her whole face was covered with dried tears. The door to her apartment was ajar. At first everyone thought someone had broken into the apartment, but none of her belongings were missing. There were no signs of forced entry. The door was scratched and opened from the inside,